You're watching the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. We are broadcasting live and are ready to hear from you. It's almost the end of the second and final day of the event, and now is your opportunity to ask questions of our guests. Today's panel discussion looked at how we can put Europe at the forefront of 6G research and innovation, identifying key enablers and challenges, and proposing a way forward to rapidly convert R&I outputs into standardization and innovation assets for Europe. We now welcome back our panelists for our live Q&A. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask about this, then send them in now using the website widget. Now, let's reintroduce our guests. David Boswarthick, Director of New Technologies at ETSI. Bernard Barani, Deputy Head of Unit DG Connect at the European Commission. Arturo Azcora of the 5G IA Vision and Societal Challenges Workgroup. Josep Martrat of the 5G IA Software Networks Workgroup, Matti Latva-Aho, Director of the Finland 6G Flagship Programme at the University of Oulu, and Emmanuel Dotaro of EXO, the European Cyber Security Organisation. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for taking part in our live discussion today. First question is already in from our audience, and David, I think this one is for you. It's a viewer seeking some clarity. The question is, isn't 6G standardization the responsibility of 3GPP? Where else will ETSI support 6G work?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. It needs to be clear that everything that relates to 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and in the future 6G has been and will be done in 3GPP. It's a very large and important standards organization, global, with participation from companies all over the globe. So we have to maintain that. ETSI is a European and, let's say, a global standards body as well. We can help. We can help build the bridge between European research, other research, before it's ready to go into the big machine that is 3GPP. So if researchers have ideas for innovative concepts which aren't fully mature, and they want to find a place to come and talk it over with like-minded people, with other companies, build a community, formulate that research idea, and then when it's ready, they can work with ETSI and with 3GPP to move it into that bigger machine. So definitely 6G will come out of 3GPP.
Thank you, David. And there's a follow-up question just in relating to the content we've seen at the event today. Are ETSI's current interests limited to the technical topics that were discussed today, or are these rather examples whilst ETSI is open to discuss new proposals?
It's a pertinent question. Today we tried to do a deep dive on 3 example topics. So we looked at future radio, security, and big data IA. There obviously, if you look at the technology trends of the future, there are many, many more. And ETSI clearly wants to be at the heart of digitization, and ICT. So those were 3 examples. ETSI's work program contains a lot more than that. And our future interests will really respond to many things. So if innovators have a great idea that relates to, let's say, connectivity and digitization, contact us and we'll see what can be done. So they were just really some examples.
Great, thanks very much. We've got a question in that's asking about the difference between 5G and 6G. Matti, I think I might put this one towards you. The question goes on to say, it has to be more than just speed. 5G promised to open up the industrial verticals with slicing. So what's left for 6G?
First of all, 5G and 6G should be seen as a new era that 5G is paving the way, and there is definitely a lot of room for drastic improvements. And with 5G, we are massively trying out, for example, what does this ultra-reliable low latency communication mean in practice, for example, in different industrial applications. And then we learn what is really missing from that. And definitely 6G is not only about ever-increasing speed, which is definitely important and still will remain as probably the key driver towards new applications that we can offer. And with this increasing speed, we are going to look at totally new frequency bands, reaching out towards terahertz frequency band, opening up totally new user experiences. One thing that has not been addressed enough, at least so far, is digital inclusion, to try to offer basic service level to anybody everywhere around the world, and responding to UN SDGs. And in general, sustainability issues have not been looked at thoroughly enough yet. Energy efficiency of the systems and energy efficiency of the society enabled by smart applications, better wireless connectivity. There are lots of things to be improved. So, of course, we don't know yet what will be the applications beyond 2030, but we know what can be and will be improved towards 6G.
Thank you, Matti. I'm sure we're going to have some more questions about societal issues and how 6G plays over the next 30 minutes or so. Question in here refers to the work that was done with 5G. The question is, we saw a lot of excellent research projects supported by the EC's Horizon 2020 project and 5G PPP. Will there be a similar support structure for 6G projects? Bernard, this could be a little bit early, but I wonder if there's anything we could say about this at this stage.
Actually, under the current time frame, which is covering what we call the Horizon 2020 period, which is the period under which the 5G public-private partnership was implemented. Under this period, we started already some, let's say, early type of research activities, especially on terahertz communication in 2018, if I remember correctly. And this year, we have already under Horizon 2020, we have launched a set of projects looking into 6G. And now we are about to implement this project contractually early next year, January next year, with one so-called flagship project, which will be a kind of overall system concept project, which will look into the various set of technologies and the vision, because we still don't have any vision for 6G. I don't think, I mean, of course, the Finnish colleagues, they have worked on their 6G flagship vision, but we don't have something like the ITU M2083 vision document at this moment in time, which is very powerful in driving the developments in 6G. With this flagship project, we will have 8 companion projects which will look into specific aspects of technology, such as intelligent surfaces or whatever kind of technology you may want to think of to be implemented in future networks. Now, this is a kind of bridging phase into a more, let's say, ambitious initiative, which will be an extended version of the 5G public-private partnership, which will be implemented between 21 and 27, so 2021, 2027. This is a partnership that we call the Smart Networks and Service Partnership, which will be implemented as a partnership between the European Commission, the public side, and the private side. That means a modified version of the existing 5G Infrastructure Association. So we will have in place a framework to make these nice projects happen. So now we have to work collectively to make these projects happen and to reap the benefits of these projects in terms of standards, for instance, but not only.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Very, very clear, and we do indeed have to work together to reap these benefits. We've got some questions, follow-up questions coming up relating to 5G work. What lessons have been learned from the 5G PP work, including the 5G IA component? And as we look to foster and support new research, how can we improve on the experience of the past 10 years? Joseph, I wonder if I could address that one to you.
Yes, it's fine. Yeah, well, I think there are very interesting lessons learned from the last years in the 5G PPP and how research projects has produced the outcomes. I think that if we look at the room for improvement, if I can say like this, one aspect would be how to better align the outcomes of the project towards the standardization process. I think it's something that we have started. in some working groups. There is a pre-standardization working group, and also the other working groups about software networks, architecture, and so on are sensible to that. And the alignment of the roadmap of the research towards an understanding from the research community, the value of putting an early outcome in this process in terms of reliability, understanding the impact or interoperability, the impact towards the market, and so on, could create a higher value. The important is to keep the speed of innovation. That's clear, and we can learn from that. How the projects are putting together under this umbrella, this PPP. It's very nice to hear the new instrument about smart networks and services. This new partnership under this joint undertaking instrument. So if we keep in that direction, I think is the right one. Yeah.
Great, thanks for that. We've got a question in about security. Well, Emmanuel, maybe I could start with you on this one and see if anybody else wants to pitch in with a response. The question is, isn't it time that a security be mandated in every single ETSI ISG and other European funded research projects and be considered upfront? It's too important to be left until later, especially as 5G becomes seen as a critical national infrastructure.
Yes, thanks for the question. You're right. I mean, security is not an option anymore. This is something which is mandatory. And the way maybe we did security in the last century is over. It means that you cannot apply security afterwards. You have to think about it from the beginning. And you have to consider, by the way, that the system is now dynamic with virtualization, softwareization, and so on. So it's even more complex than before. So you have to take care about security all along the life cycle of the systems, of the services, and it's much more complex than before, again, because we introduce new technologies, but it also means new attack surface. So you have to deal with that. And clearly, if you want to apply this for new usage from the vertical sectors, you need to reach a level of security which is compliant with those usages. And so you need clearly to target sometimes high-grade security. And that would be clearly some work to do for the 6G and already for the 5G, because we are not yet at the right level of security for some of the application of the 5G today and for the 6G tomorrow.
Thank you very much. David, could I pick up on that one with you perhaps? Is security something that is taken into account when the new ISG starts up, or it's something that is encouraged to be looked at from day one?
Yeah, no, it's a good perspective. We do always consider the security elements of systems and technologies that they are looked at. But the question could be, are they looked at early enough, and are the learnings in each ISG or each technical body shared between them? So that's, in ETSI, we have a group called TC Cyber, and they do a fantastic job of sort of overseeing much of the security work in ETSI and working on specific framework areas and specific technology areas. But I think the suggestion that maybe came in from the question earlier, could we upfront say to the people forming an ISG, start thinking about security on day one or day two, is a good one. And also looking at other softer factors as we move towards 6G, such as is the technology sustainable? Is it efficient? Is it energy efficient? In 4G and 5G, this was important. I think in 6G, this will become even more important. We can design a fantastic algorithm on a wonderful connectivity system, but will it consume large amounts of energy, which just won't be sustainable? So I think maybe moving beyond just pure technology, which is always fun, but looking at technology with concerns on security, privacy, and then sustainability would be a good way maybe to start the new year. That when we form a group, we at least ask that question: how secure can it be, and how sustainable can it be?
Good to hear. Thank you, David. Well, as suspected, we are getting a few questions in about the societal aspects of 6G. Arturo, maybe I could address this question to you and the work that you're doing in the 5G IA group. The question is, we've heard a lot about societal needs with regards to 6G, but what are the main societal challenges that we've already identified, and what community groups might we be looking to work with?
There are a number of societal challenges. They are related with the UN sustainability goals. So we can place them in the different areas of the UN sustainability goals. So 6G will contribute worldwide because of its extended coverage to improve different sectors, one of them being agriculture. So we aim, for example, to improve the agriculture throughout the world. Another societal challenge is energy reduction. We need to be able to do all of our ICT development and computation and communication with less energy. We cannot continue with the growth path that we have been following along the past years. With 6G, we are having a very ambitious objective in terms of energy. We want to be able to transmit 1 terabit, which is 1,000 gigabits, with only 1 joule of energy. So this is something also very relevant. We have other objectives for societal challenges, like a more secure and private society, and also contributions to health that 6G will allow permanently monitoring of our health status with a personal area network connecting sensors directly to the 6G network. So there are a number of societal challenges that I mentioned. There are more, but these are some of the ones I would like to mention. So we live in a planet more healthy, with less hunger, with which is more sustainable in terms of energy, and with a higher also economical value, which is also important. So we aim also to create growth, economical growth around 6G.
Thank you. We have another viewer who's asking about how the UN SDG goals figure into this effort. Matti, you mentioned the SDG goals in your earlier response. These have been around for a couple of decades now, really, haven't they? Have we tried to factor these in with 5G? Have we made any efforts so far, or is it something that we really want to have a greater focus on with 6G?
I think we have a little bit overlooked those challenges earlier. If you have a careful look at what really is in those 17 different targets, many of those address rather poor areas in developing countries, and those are the particular areas which have huge challenges in coverage. They have also huge challenges in provisioning of constant source of energy to power up the networks. They don't have any core network, so backhauling is a big issue and challenge. And all these boil down to economical challenges in these poor areas. And we need totally different ways of thinking and ways of supporting those, but also new technologies. And it will be very interesting to see if finally, for example, satellite community is going to provide affordable means to try to cover most parts of the world. As for specific targets from UN SDGs, I would like to emphasize what Arturo also already brought up a little bit, these energy efficiency targets. So currently the wildest estimates are that by 6G era, the communication networks would consume 20% of all electricity available, and that would be totally unacceptable level. We have to do something about it.
Thank you, Matti. Whilst we're on this subject, there is another question that's just come in about societal requirements, and it's specifically referencing ETSI. So, David, I'm not sure how much of this you can address, but the question is, when ETSI talks about including societal requirements into next generation standards, how do you propose to do it? Will you look to expand your membership base with different communities? And if so, where would you be looking?
Yeah, well, we already have a number of SMEs are members of ETSI. We have a number of user groups who are members of ETSI and who work with ETSI. So that's the beginning. We have a user group, we have a human factors group. So that's looking at the impact of the telecoms on users and making sure that human factors are included when we look at designing new systems, existing systems. As always, we can do more. And I think as we move into the next 10 years, towards 6G, social issues and human issues will become more and more relevant to be included into business issues and technology issues. So we can do more. I think the suggestion earlier of always considering security upfront, sustainability upfront, and also maybe, it sounds a bit strange, but is it the right thing to do? Doing this technology be the right thing to do? The old adage of having technology that does no harm. So we could always ask, when we set up new work in ETSI, we could always ask these series of questions that the founding companies can say, yes, you know what, that's quite provocative, we'd like to come back on that. So we have in place systems and checks in it to make sure that users and the social impacts are considered. As always, we can do more, but I think those checks, as we set up new work in ETSI and ISGs and in technical bodies, would be useful as 2021.
Thank you, David. Now we have a question in, and I'm going to open this to anybody, but perhaps Bernard, if I could start with you. How does early 6G research and work align with the spectrum work being done by the ITU, its WRC, as well as whatever is going to be following IMT 2020? Or is this all too early? Is this of little consequence at this stage, at this time?
Well, my understanding is that it's maybe a little bit too early to consider these things. So in the last WRCs, we had a number of frequency bands which were identified for 5G usage, and I would assume that when we move into 6G, these frequency bands, especially those that look at the higher millimeter wave, ranges, will be also open for 6G type of applications, but the work on the so-called Terahertz spectrum remains largely to be done, I believe. So the 6G research will have certainly an important part on spectrum. I think most of the things remain to be done here, also because we probably don't yet exactly know the capabilities of the technologies, for instance, in terms of all the microelectronics that you have to use to design these type of systems, in terms of power amplifiers, power leakages, or whatever kind of characteristics you want to associate with the microelectronics which is needed for these systems. So in our understanding, there is still quite a bit of work to be done to understand, first of all, the system concepts, how the system concepts declines or materialize into technologies, and how these technologies are driving requirements for spectrum and spectrum usages. And then ultimately will be the question when it comes to the licensing process at the level of the member states, how this technology is licensed, how the spectrum is licensed. I think we are far away from this stage at this moment in time.
Thank you, Bernard. Yeah, Matty, please.
Yeah, I would like to continue a little bit what Bernard said about licensing, and I think that's where major development is really needed. If you look at spectrum licensing policies currently throughout the world, it's rather old-fashioned, and now we are moving towards higher and higher frequency bands of spectrum, and the signal propagation is much shorter, and we can locally refarm the spectrum quite efficiently, and new policies are definitely needed, or at least it would be quite possible to do that. So not just allocating new parts of spectrum, but licensing policies in general need to be looked at and revisited.
Thank you, Matty. Arturo.
Thank you. I think I was totally in agreement with Matty and with Bernard. On my view, we need to move in 6G towards spectrum sharing and dynamic spectrum sharing. This totally static allocation of spectrum causes an inefficient usage of it. And we need, of course, to regulated spectrum. I'm not saying that spectrum is free, definitely not, but should be regulated with view on sharing. There are technical advances in all reconfigurable radio frontends that can act in a very flexible way. So we should be aiming to radio systems that will look for the spectrum dynamically and see what windows are available in your area. Again, with some concern to other users, it's not something individual. And this is the way to go.
Thank you very much. Question in Emmanuel, question about cybersecurity here, and that is, when we start to research 6G work, can we and can your organization play a role in shaping the research into standards by considering cybersecurity from the very start?
Well, yeah. So I wanted to say something about also the what is that is done in ETSI and other bodies. We clearly lack today awareness about what we are using in terms of system and services. If you ask yourself when you're using 4G or 5G or even a service in the cloud, what is the level of security that you are using? You don't know. You just have confidence or not about the provider of the service. So we need clearly to expose what people are using and what they can use. So there is a mix of research opportunities, of standardization opportunities that has to clearly to drive the delivery to something which makes the users aware of what they are using. So we have certification process, and we have something new in Europe, which is Cyber Act, so 3 level of certification. We have to translate that into the standards, and we have clearly to translate that into the usage of the services. If we don't do that, we will continue to use either best effort or something that you don't even know what is what you're using. So cybersecurity is some question of perimeters. You have to take care about your perimeter, which can be very small on the hardware or the software and so on. But what counts at the end is the end-to-end level of security that the user will benefit or not. So clearly, we are working on methodologies and things to push towards the frameworks and standardization. For instance, to have composition of the various parts of the system and the services, because you will have a lot of black boxes, and if you don't have a way to combine this into something which gives you the answer for the end-to-end, we are lacking something. So clearly, this is one way to go. Another way to go that is mandatory is to take into account, as I said before, the new dynamics of the systems. So having an assessment of security of your system once doesn't mean anything if you can change just pushing on a button or using a software, the nature and what is inside your system. So we have to take to handle that. And clearly there are a lot of room for progress, both in research, standardization, and so on. So clearly we need to have work dedicated each and every piece of technical techniques you introduce in the system. We are also to draw the big picture, which means something for the end user.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you very much. We've got a question directed at Arturo and the panel we've just had earlier today. Arturo, the questioner asks, you listed a number of KPIs for possible 6G during the panel earlier. Another speaker today agreed or argued against setting KPIs too early in the process. Is there a balance to be struck here? Because if not, what comes first, doing the research or setting the performance targets?
6G is totally system-oriented research. It's not fundamental technology driven. We are aiming to build a commercial system. And when you're aiming to build a commercial system, you need to have a reasonably clear view on what are the performance indicators of the commercial system. So I think we need to define KPIs reasonably early in the process. So is this moment right now, or should we wait a little? Okay, maybe we should wait a little. The KPIs I indicated are not official yet. These are the ones being proposed, but have not been fixed. So definitely we need to think about KPIs soon. We need to fix them sufficiently soon, because if you don't fix the goal, you cannot orient the research. If you do not know what you are designing, it's not possible to do the design. So all in all, my answer is we do need KPIs substantially early in the process. We do have already some idea on what the KPIs could be, but the KPIs have not been fixed yet. This is, I think, what is the intention of the question.
Great, thank you very much. Just getting one in, but this is one we received about 15 minutes ago. Matti, you've talked about terahertz, and I think some of our other guests talked about terahertz with respect to 6G. What functionality or features are available with terahertz that are absent in millimeter wave?
There's definitely much more bandwidth available over there. And one of the targets with terahertz communications is, since there is such a huge bandwidth, we may actually start to think about much simpler air interfaces and transmission techniques. So rather than having very complicated MIMO OFDM style air interfaces, we actually can try to look at rather simplistic solutions with relatively short ranges. And still we could have really high throughputs. But the major obstacle with terahertz communications is really the implementation of it. We have to look at new material technologies, new circuit technologies. We really don't know. Nobody knows yet. Is it going to be commercially viable to build large-scale systems based on terahertz connectivity solutions? It needs to be seen. That's why we are doing research.
Thank you, Matti. And I think Arturo, you'd like to just comment on that as well?
Yes, I totally agree with Matti. I just wanted to extend a little his answer. So Terahertz has a huge bandwidth, but it has a problem, which is very high atmospheric attenuation. So this very high bandwidth, which is basically 1,000 gigahertz that we can use, is 10,000 gigahertz that we can use, 10,000 gigahertz that we can use. For example, for satellite system or for high altitude platforms, it could be used in whole. For terrestrial systems, it can be used only the whole bandwidth for short distances, like, for example, in chipset communication, so we can save in wiring inside chipsets, or for a personal area network, or for the house to connect the different devices that you have audiovisuals without wires. So you can do without HDMI cables. They will all connect wirelessly. And for 6G long-range communications, there is a window in the low terahertz band which offers something like 200 gigahertz, is 186 gigahertz, with reasonably acceptable attenuation. So there is a lot expected from the terahertz band, although there are substantial difficulties. So I think it's going to be a very interesting research area.
Thank you very much. Yes, a question we just got in the last couple of minutes. I'm combining it with another one we've had here. I'm opening it to anybody who'd like to answer this one. And this refers to the so-called OTT companies, the likes of Facebook, Google, Apple, etc. The questions are, these companies innovate at incredible rates, but much of that innovation is in-house with little interaction with public research projects, simply creating their own de facto standards. Is this a risk for Europe? And also, would you hope or expect they'd have an increased role and participation in the work we're doing with 6G? Anybody brave enough to have a stab at that answer?
Well, if I may, I will start with something here about, if we talk about the OTTs and also the hyperscalers. On one hand, it is clear that if you look at the telcos and the market, at the beginning there was a competition, right, with per content and with the OTTs, because the OTTs were making advantage of the network, but the cost of the network was left to the telcos. That's one part of the story. If we introduce in this story, in this picture, the hyperscalers, and you think about what has happened with the cloud markets, right? The cloud market in Europe was fragmented, was limited. And I'm trying to do here an analogy, what could happen here. You see these big companies, and in the cloud market that was in Europe was pretty fragmented, and there was some kind of risk for Europe to leverage in these big cloud providers, because we have, in terms of regulatory aspects, some aspects related to jurisdiction, data protection, very strict mechanisms imposed in Europe, very advanced, and this has created some frictions. If we move now to the telcos and we see the situation of deploying a new system, all the hyperscalers have started to work with the edge. There's a clear convergence on the edge. The cloud community moving to the edge. There is the IoT, and there is the software virtualization, let's say, of the networks, and transform the edge to something useful. There is a convergence and also a fight there. Who is going to be in charge of that edge? So the hyperscalers at that moment can be seen like frenemies somehow, because you need them for certain big deployments and so petascales, and this is what they see the telcos as a telco cloud when they need that part. But on the other hand, you see that they are jumping into DH in order to offer, and all the petascales have these solutions today already, in order to deploy 5G network RDH and offer these this operation towards the operators, to the communication service providers. So all in all, what happened? What I see, and I hopefully see, that big companies understand that when there is better cooperation, this is created a value that is shared. Because Europe is clear stating that we don't want to be in Europe only the consumers of the technology and leverage on American hyperscalers for the cloud or the technology of the Asian. We need to establish what is our digital sovereignty and capabilities that we can develop in Europe and work together on that. And this creates a bit bigger value. And I hope that in the evolution of 6G, we see passing and steps in that direction, hopefully.
Thank you, Josep. Thank you very much. I think we've probably got time for one more question. This is an interesting one. Isn't it a fact that a new generation of technology, 6G, requires wide-scale replacement of existing technology, and that goes against all the things that we believe in with environmental sustainability, such as recycle and reuse and avoiding waste and reducing impact on natural resources? So we talk about 6G taking into account societal benefits, but aren't we sort of just guilty of just replacing all we've done before, no backwards compatibility, and we're actually, the net gain is zero or worse?
We have to understand that when talking about higher frequency bands, we ultimately talk about rather local or limited range networks. We need large area networks still for the future, and the current systems like 4G is providing really excellent solution for that for long ahead in the future. It remains to be seen how much 6G is going to propose to replace existing large-scale networks and at which frequency bands. But now really at least in research community, the focus is really in higher frequency bands, rather short-range systems.
So first of all, these cycles take a long amount of time. So we are talking about cycles of 7 to 10 years. So it's not that we are like replacing equipment every year. And actually, by the time they are replaced, many times they are close to the end of their physical life. So we are not pushing a generation every short number of years, but every reasonably substantial number of years. So this would be my first answer towards this. So we replace equipment again when they are reasonably close to the actual physical finalization of the functionality. Second, the new equipment are usually much more efficient. So if you take, for example, GSM was much more wasteful in terms of spectrum and much more wasteful in terms of energy, much more. So now we are replacing by new energy systems that are much better and much more efficient. And finally, just to address a very complex comment under 3 different points of view, the heaviest parts of the system, which is the actual towers and the power systems, are reutilized. So the new deployments are making usage of the former sites. So then you reuse the actual tower and the actual energy that it's supplying this. So you just have to install the very new ICT equipment, which is smaller in footprint, is more environmental friendly, and much more efficient. So I think it's all advantages in this respect.
Very good. Thank you, Arturo. We are approaching the hour, so we are rapidly running out of time. So I'll have to wrap up our session today, and thank you all very much indeed. We've reached the end of the live Q&A, and indeed the end of this 2-day event. Thank you so much for participating. But before we go, David, as our host, some final thoughts from you. We've talked about what is needed, but are there any identified clear actions that will be put in place as we move on beyond this ETSI event to avoid it just being another conference conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Guy. Well, first of all, I think we've recognised that the event was useful from the comments we've had, in the questions we've had, in the exchanges we've had, in the virtual corridors. We don't have real corridors, but in the virtual corridors, there's a lot of interest, and the timing seems to be right. We need to discuss 6G research now. We mustn't forget, it's very important that the audience remember that's now we're developing, we're deploying 5G. 5G is the technology for the next 10 years, and we'll be seeing early 6G rolling out in 8-10 years time. So for now, we will focus on 5G. 5G evolved, moving into beyond 5G and then 6G. But certainly, I think people have got an appetite for this sort of event. So ETSI will commit to doing a similar event this time next year, in the autumn or the fall of next year. But we hope with COVID will be behind us globally, we'll be able to have some face-to-face elements so we can actually mix together in real corridors and have social activities. And I think those social activities are essential to remain innovative at all times. But really, a year is a long time, so we need to participate in other events, and there will be at least an event next June, which will be the 6G flagship EU CNC and the 6G summit, which will happen probably June next year. So ETSI will certainly be involved in that. And I think we need to keep the conversation going, because we touched on many topics, but we only touched on them. We need to develop those conversations further. Also, I think we heard many people repeating and saying over again that we need to work together in Europe to ensure that we are at the forefront of technology research and standardization, and obviously standards are an important part of that element. But we need to move beyond the words, not just PowerPoints and promises in a conference. We need to move to action, and at least we have 5G IA and ETSI signing an MOU, which will happen the week after this event. I think it's happening in the ETSI GA, so that's a good thing, so concrete action. And it's only a first place to begin. As 5G moves towards 6G, there will be the SNS partnership coming out of Europe, and ETSI will be greatly involved in that. So that's a concrete commitment. Also, several people have kindly mentioned the word ETSI and ISGs in the same phrase as Terahertz. So we're thinking about it seriously. We're working with several ETSI members, including large companies and universities, about what could we do in ETSI, because it seems, at least the conversation on Terahertz, the time is right now to bring it closer to standards. So we're thinking possibly to set up an ISG to do some early pre-standards work on Terahertz. Obviously, this will be something that we'll see eventually in 3GPP, but maybe the conversation could now come to an ISG and ETSI. So we're working actively with ETSI members on how that could happen. So possibly one outcome could be an ISG on Terahertz next year, which would be great. Also, I think we've really agreed that it's useful to have this sort of event again. So I just really like to summarize, we could say we want to do this more and more often. This was the first event we've had probably in ETSI. The last one was 2 years ago, I believe. So we'll do more and more. We want to formalize relationship with the European Commission, with 5G IA, with Network 2020, with AIoTI, with all of these really important technology platforms, to ensure that we work together in the same direction, avoid fragmentation, and really build upon the strengths of Europe. Identify our strengths and then build upon them as we compete on a global field. Also, I think we'll agree that we shall start looking at early candidate 6G technologies in ETSI, if the members wish to do that, and Terahertz could be a starting place. And also, really an agreement that we need to bring the standardization closer to research, and even closer beyond research to the education of the undergraduates and the postgraduates who will become the researchers and the engineers of tomorrow. So ensure that they understand the value of designing standardized solution, of building secure solutions early on. So really get up into the university domain as well. So it's difficult to summarize 2 days in a few lines, but I think that would cover it from my perspective. If I'm doing the closing sentences, I just really like to take a moment to thank Guy for the excellent moderating that he's done over the past 2 days. It's really been very, very, very good. And also to the whole TelecomTV team, as well as our panelists, our speakers, everybody who was involved, and also to the audience. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it. I sincerely hope that you learned a few things and that it's got your appetite ready for further conversation. So please don't hesitate to come back to ETSI, come back to TelecomTV with other issues you'd like to see developed. But with that, let's close the event. I wish you a bon appetit because we're heading into lunchtime, and we hope to see you in a similar ETSI research event this time next year. So thank you very much. Goodbye.